Just wait for a couple of people to join us, but thanks very much for making some time tonight to join this cooperation live event. Just while people are joining, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Joe Fortune. I'm the General Secretary of the party. We've got a fantastic speaker with us today who I'll introduce as well as we go on. But just before I do, there's just a few pieces that I want you to know in terms of our housekeeping, if that's okay. And the first and foremost thing to say is that if you require closed captioning of this event, please do make sure that you take advantage of the work that we do with the RNIB and that's on the CC closed captioning. Press on that for captions through this event. Secondly, whilst you've been muted for the start of this event while we hear from our speaker, we are incredibly keen and looking forward to your own contributions to the event today as well. So if there's a couple of things that you want to do in terms of ask questions, there's two main ways of that happening. The first is to go into the chat, and my colleague will pass me those questions, and I'll be putting them to our speaker today. But also, if you go to the participants button at the bottom of most screens, if you click on that and raise your hand, I'll be looking for yourselves there as well, and we'll bring you in to ask your question direct as well. So the last thing I would say in terms of housekeeping is that this event is being recorded. So if you don't want, why we do that is so that people who aren't able to be here today with us will be able to benefit from the discussion, understand some of the issues that we'll cover tonight, and it'll be available on our YouTube channel as well. So if you don't want to appear within that recording, do feel free to turn your camera off. So that's the housekeeping bits, which I'm duty bound to say, but where I'm going to next is not the duty bound piece, which is the exciting bit, why we're here tonight. And we've got an amazing event today with Dame Meg Hillier, who I got the new bit into the name there, Meg, and obviously all of our congratulations to you on that. But Meg is the chair of the Public Accounts Committee, and I know from my time knocking round Westminster, the Public Accounts Committee is one of the most important organs within that Parliament. So we're incredibly delighted to have Meg here to give us the benefit of her experience and her views from that position. And I hope we'll be able to hear a little bit more about the Public Accounts Committee and its work as this event goes on. But we're also here to think about financial inclusion. And there are far too many millions, and literally millions of people in this country who are suffering financial exclusion. And financial exclusion in this country takes many different forms, whether that's access to cash, whether it's cost of lending, whether it's in terms of where you live and what communities you come from. Some of these incredible drivers of financial exclusion are some of the most basic aspects of allowing people that role and participation within society. It's something the cooperative movement and the cooperative party take incredibly seriously. It's something we've been campaigning for, and Meg knows only too well. We've been campaigning in these issues for many years. It's not a battle which is won in many ways. It's a battle which is getting worse. Some of the numbers of financial exclusion, I think there's estimates in around 3.5–4 million people are financially excluded in this country today, and those numbers do vary, but it's of that magnitude. Meg is, as I say, chair of the Public Accounts Committee, is also a Labour and Cooperative Member of Parliament. In fact, was the chair of the Cooperative Party Parliamentary Group when I first started in the Cooperative Party just only 2 or 3 weeks ago. But why I think that it's incredibly important for Meg to talk from the public accounts point of view is because the Public Accounts Committee is there to hold that government to account where others can't. They've got access to things, and we'll hear about that from Meg herself, access to data and support which many others do not go anywhere close to. So to hear from Meg about one of her reports in real time about financial inclusion, we will also gain an insight into the way in which this really important aspect of scrutiny within Westminster happens. So with that introduction, and I hope that that's a reasonable setup of what the discussion is. I'm going to hand over to Meg now in a second, but I'm going to implore yourselves also to be making sure you're ready to ask your questions, make your contributions after we've heard from Meg. But with that, Meg Hillier, thanks very much for being here with us today, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Joe. And it's really great to talk to fellow cooperators about this important issue. But before I go into some of the issues around financial inclusion and particularly a report that the Public Accounts Committee published about access to cash, I wanted just to explain a little bit about what the Public Accounts Committee does in simple terms. So we are the oldest select committee in Parliament and in the world. We have been going for 160 years, and we were set up by William Gladstone because he felt that money should be monitored and checked by Parliament, that the money that's spent by by government, the taxpayers' money spent by the government. In those days, there were around 30 officials in the Home Office. Now there's over 30,000 at least, without including border force. So it goes to show how things have grown. There are only 3 living predecessors of mine. I could give this, if I give you the answers, you can add them to your next pub quiz. And that's David Davis, MP, because he was in as chair when Labour was in power, because it's always chaired by a member of the opposition, the main opposition. So Edward Lee, and of course my predecessor, Dame Margaret Hodge, who was chair while I was on the committee. So I've been on the committee for a decade, and I've been chair for 6 years. And it's what I call seeing the guts of Whitehall spread before you every week. We have 2 sessions a week when Parliament is sitting. We are supported by a body called the National Audit Office, which has access to every set of public accounts through government that exists pretty much. So they audit all departmental accounts and can have access to any of the departmental bodies. And they look at the aggregate of schools, not at schools individually, not at hospitals individually, but they look at the aggregate of those as well. They can't look at private companies, but they can look at the contracts that private companies have on behalf of the taxpayer. And as a committee, we have the power to call people, paper, and for people, papers, and records, and we use that. And sometimes we even see documents that are not seen by other, even sometimes I wonder about ministers, if they've seen some of the things I've seen, they might have called them to account. But our simple task, if you like, is to watch taxpayers' money wherever it's spent, and to monitor the economy, the efficiency, and the effectiveness of that spend. So that gives us quite a wide reach. What we don't do is look at whether the policy is the right policy or not, but the effectiveness element can get us quite a long way. And we're obviously cross-party, so I work with a lot of Conservatives because of their majority. They've got more members, but also well supported by Labour, also 1 SNP and 1 Lib Dem, so like other select in that sense. But it is a fascinating committee, and I just do commend you. If you're ever interested in a subject, quite often the committee will have looked at it, and you'll see the numbers and the spending. So that's what I spend my time doing. And back at the end of last year, we looked at a very interesting subject, the production and distribution of cash. And what is fascinating, what immediately struck us about this when we began to look into it, was that the whole of the distribution mechanism for cash is in private sector hands. If you think about it, it's the banks, it's the ATMs, arguably the post office. Well, the post office isn't no longer in the public sector. So all of these bodies make decisions about how cash is spent, and they are not controlled by the public sector. So we've seen a general attrition over many years before even COVID hit. So in 2019, cash was used in less than 3 in 10 transactions. And in the 2 years to January of 2020, so before the pandemic hit, the number of ATMs fell by 12%. And in my own constituency, I saw that number drop massively. So, this is an inner London constituency where there's a lot of people. So you'd expect these machines to be used a lot if people were using cash. But free to use ATMs, and if you're interested in this, it's worth, your MP can find this information. Actually, I got this from the House of Commons library. We saw the number of free to use machines from July 2018 to April of this year, so just recently, dropped from 99 to 58, and the pay to use ones dropped, but fewer in number. We lost 18 from 79 to 61. And if you look at the UK as a whole, that's a loss over nearly 3 years of over 12,500 free to use ATMs and 465 pay to use ones. Now the pay to use ones, remember, is worth highlighting. What if you haven't used one recently, they charge a flat rate of about £2.50 to take any cash out. Well, if you're taking out £200 and you want to pay £2.50, well, it's still a charge. But if you take out £10 and you pay £2.50, then obviously the rate is a lot higher. But one of the things we were really concerned about in looking at this is that it seems that no one was in charge, and that's not surprising. when the system's very fragmented. So the Treasury has a hand in this in setting policy on cash. The Financial Conduct Authority has a role, the Payment Systems Regulator has a role, and the Bank of England. Bit of an alphabet soup of bodies who are looking at and responsible for how cash is available. But if you another sign of how cash is coming out of the marketplace, if you like, is that the Royal Mint, which produces coins, the Bank of England produced the notes. In Scotland, of course, it's slightly different, but and in Northern Ireland. But the Royal Mint produces coins, and their coin production over the last decade has fallen by 65% because people are not using coins very much, because we're using cash generally a lot less. So we were very concerned as a committee, and we had one of our most interesting sessions on this in terms of both preparation, what we're planning to do afterwards, which I'll talk to you about, and generally. And we just think that although the government has said it wants to preserve cash, that's at the same time as there are backbench Tory MPs saying they want to see a cashless society. That's the MP for Arundel who said that. And you've got quite an interesting mix of views on this, and not much movement by government. So we said, the government needs to have a bit of a plan of action, and hopefully in the Queen's speech, really nothing said there that would give me any comfort that they're moving very fast on this. Prior to that, they had just announced a consultation actually at the end of last year, saying that they want to see access to cash through supermarkets without a purchase being necessary. Well, this goes to some of the problems around financial inclusion, which Joe touched on. I'm a rich MP. I can go and get money out anywhere I want. If I had to pay a fee, I could still survive. I'd still have money left in my bank account. And I could go to a supermarket and take money out whether I'm shopping or not, because I wouldn't need to check the balance in my bank account. But if the balance in your bank account is regularly running down to zero and you're wanting to get your last tenner out, you need to check that you can get the last tenner out. And that means going to your local post office in your village or your town and finding your neighbour is behind the counter and having to ask them personally for your balance before you can take any money out has an embarrassment to it for many people. Going to a cash point and finding they only to spit out £20 notes means you might not be able to take out that last £10 that you need to eat your payments for food or whatever till the end of the month. And so there is a real issue about how we access cash, and the idea that you just close banks and replace them with free ATMs. And there are rules now about you can't remove the last free ATM from areas, but you still have to you still have quite a wide radius of capture for those access points, which is still quite a long distance for somebody who just needs a small amount of cash, perhaps to go to do a little shopping or go to the pub or pay for something for their children for school. And if you also look at the exclusion issues of nearly everything we do, so I represent Shoreditch, which might not surprise you, but even before COVID, there were businesses that just would not accept cash, because from the business's point of view, the handling of cash and taking it to the bank, as branches are increasingly closing, was a hassle. But by not taking cash, they're excluding a lot of people. Now, that's not perhaps the worst thing in the world if someone's selling, it's a hipster coffee shop, which might not be frequented, but we mustn't assume, because lots of people do need cash. Often low-paid poor workers are often quite young, as well as other people. It's not necessarily an age thing, but that if you're paying £3.50 for a cup of coffee, you're probably going to have a credit card or a phone payment. But as that spreads, and we've seen that really dig in with COVID, with far more purchases by card or online, and online, if you don't have access to credit cards and online charging mechanisms, you just can't buy things. So I remember during lockdown meeting some residents in Hackney who said they couldn't understand why there was a queue outside Iceland. Well, one, it was the price of food, obviously, but also because you could still go in and use cash, and it was really important that people could do that. But so I think we've got to remember that the reality of people's lives, and remember that cash and access to it is actually a vital part of that financial inclusion. I mean, there are other issues around financial inclusion which we haven't looked at particularly on the committee, but particularly one of my concerns is about basic bank accounts, that they are available and banks should be promoting them, but very often they don't. And many of my constituents are very worried about having a bank account because they worry about overdrafts. And there are mechanisms in place to stop them going overdrawn and having overdraft fees. They're not well publicised. So banks aren't very keen because a basic bank account doesn't bring them any money. There's not many fees attached. They can't charge an overdraft, because that's the whole point of a basic bank account, that someone poor doesn't get into further debt. Well, not the whole point, but it's part of the model. So they're not so keen to promote it. They'd rather have someone who racks up credit card bills and has to pay a fee, because that makes more money brutally. So there is a real issue there about how I think the mainstream high street banks have really let people down on these issues. And if you look at other areas that things have gone online, if you've got a child at school, increasingly you have a parent pay type account where your child will use their fingerprint or some card to buy food, but you've got to top that up somehow from home. It's difficult to do that with cash. And we have many other systems that go online, so there's an assumption that you can top up with a card, a touch card, or you can do it online. And that online access makes it very difficult for people who worry about spending money that they haven't got. Cash is a great budgeting tool. And I think if you think back to the roots of the co-op in terms of food, and the co-op set up to tackle adulterated food products, to sort of physically have control over the products that were being sold. Cash is a great physical thing that people can count, monitor, put aside, and make sure that they're saving for when they need it. And I think that's increasingly an issue. And don't get me started on prepaid meters and so on, because it's more expensive to pay, of course, your electricity through a meter with a card. But again, it's a very useful budgeting tool for people who are really frightened about having quarterly bills which they have no control over, and then suddenly finding they can't pay it. So while we have people not just living in poverty, but people living with very tight budgets, we will need cash. So where are things at? Well, we're concerned that although the government said it wants to maintain access to cash, it's not doing a great deal about it. There's no sense of urgency at all. There's no single body overall responsible for doing this, or ensuring that either people or businesses have access to cash. And there's nothing that's requiring businesses to accept cash. So you or I could set up a business tomorrow and never accept cash ever, and that would be perfectly okay. Now you can say that's fine, but if every business did that, then where would a lot of people be? And there will still be a percentage of people who use cash for lots of reasons, as I've gone through. And then the things like I won't go into the issues around the Royal Mint, but there are issues there as well. If people are using coins, then there's also operating profit issues for organisations like the Mint and the Bank of England about what they produce and when. And that's the cost of producing cash can come into it, but that's rather a niche issue. But so I think it's fantastic that the co-op is taking this up. And what I would urge you to do, it's a great local campaign as well, because people understand this, real people. Maybe if you're high up in the Treasury or in government, you perhaps don't get it. What was heartening when my committee looked at this is that it wasn't actually divided by party. There were Conservative members equally concerned about this dash to credit and online payments and virtual payments, rather than understanding the real needs of people. But the problem for government, brutally, is if they act to preserve cash in order to make sure that bank branches or even an ATM, they subsidise that in order to try and make sure that they can encourage an organisation to maintain that presence. And so that there can be a subsidy, not obviously for bank branches, but over COVID, a number of us, particularly I've been liaising with London MPs, are seeing bank branches close across our constituencies. Now in London, you're still within a bus ride or a walk of another bank. But if that's the last bank in a small town or a village or a rural area, that's a real issue, because that suddenly leaves some people stranded with transport, stranded, and therefore stranded financially, with just nowhere to get cash from when they need it. So it's vital that we look at this issue of cash. It's part of the wider picture of financial inclusion. And on the other wider issues of financial inclusion, though my committee's not been looking at this recently, I've done work in the past on the issues of loans. And we've got to recognise that if the world does work on credit, whether you've got a mortgage at the top end or you needing to borrow something to pay for a new washing machine because it's broken down. And we still haven't really got a solution about how, if you're poor, you can fairly and easily borrow money when you really need it and pay it back. Instead, we've seen over-enthusiastic grants of advances on universal credit, though that has now improved. It's again something my committee's looked at, because we recognise the challenge of giving somebody who's not got a big income, a large debt to follow through. So there are other areas of work that my committee looks at. So just to give you a flavour of what is coming up, we look at the DWP a lot. Obviously, that's a lot around universal credit. We're very concerned about overpayments, because in terms of financial inclusion, if somebody is told that they've been overpaid a few £1,000s by the Department for Work and Pensions because they miscalculated benefits, that's a very big burden on someone who's on a low or average or low or middle wages. And I think that we really hold their feet to the fire on that. That's just a quick canter through some of the issues, Joe. And I'm very happy to take questions, but I really would urge you, I don't know where people are from in the country, but it's really worth, whoever your MP is, raising this with your own member of parliament, whatever the party, because we don't think, my committee doesn't actually think that the government's really taking this seriously enough. And that's a cross-party committee. But if people aren't making noise about this, we can see ourselves slipping into this issue where people just cannot access cash when they need it. And that will just increase the many issues around financial exclusion that we see too often in this country.
Thank you very much for that, Meg. That was an incredibly interesting dip into the world of the Public Accounts Committee, but really importantly into this particular issue on access to cash. And you couldn't have left us at a better point. I've just having put into the chat for participants a tool that the Co-operative Party has, which is, you can see there, party.coop / access to cash MP. That will allow you to put in your postcode today, pop that in. It will find your member of parliament. It will say exactly that you feel that access to cash is an important issue, and them as your representatives should do more to raise it in Westminster. So if you are able to see that in the chat, do go through to it. But I say the address again, which is www.party.coop / access to cash MP. So there is a route to make that easy for you today as well. But thanks very much for that contribution, Meg. And I am going to open up for questions, and we've got two questions coming in from the floor, but I'll start with one which came in first just from the chat, which is from Donald. Donald is talking about the importance he's placed personally on using cash. He's talking about devoting one day a month for himself to use cash, to make sure that there was that was an important part of his behavioural patterns. But he's sort of asking ourselves, is there more that we can do? Do you think, Meg, that something in around cash only day would be a step forward, some way of making that sort of promotion clearer, I guess? And within the question, it's also levelling that at the court parties. That's something that we can spearhead. But Meg, from the point of view of that profile and some of the things that you talk about, I do think that profile is required, and something like this could help, couldn't it? Oh, coming off. There you go.
Politely muting so you didn't hear me breathing. Donald, I think that's a really good suggestion. We've got to turn the heat up on this. It's going to get forgotten. I mean, the MP for Arundel, hasn't used cash himself for a very long time, because he came from a very lucrative background beforehand. Not knocking someone for having a highly paid job, if that's what was his thing before he came to Parliament. Good luck to him. But there is a real concern that people just don't understand the reality. So actually, that would be a great local campaign to get going, and something that everybody could participate in very easily, and just spend cash. And it would also bring up businesses sharp, because I represent a constituency which has got some fantastic small businesses which are really socially committed. They very often tend to be very green, very focused, actually a lot of them sort of really aspiring to strong social values, and they haven't really all thought through what not allowing people to pay in cash means. So we need to be probing and pressing businesses to accept this as well, and make sure that they don't set up from the beginning to think that cash is something that's going out of fashion, because people still do use it and people will still need it, and that's the crucial thing.
Thanks very much and for that, Meg. And I'm going to take a question from the floor, and my colleague Izzy will be primed to bring to unmute Caroline Richardson. Carolyn Richardson on the call. So Carolyn, if you come through, you're unmuted now.
Hi, I'd just like to speak to Meg about what she said. And I understand that when you're in a cross-party committee like this, that you may not be familiar with the subject, but I imagine there's a lot of people in the audience here whose lives you described, who do need cash, but it's not telling us anything. We already know what the issues are. We already know that in my village, there's a shop that only takes cash, and that there's only one cash point machine there that doesn't charge. We know this. This is our lived reality. What we're interested in is not us being sort of directed. My MP, by the way, is Mark Jenkinson. So I think saying anything about money to Mark Jenkinson, he'll just say, well, we don't give poor people money because they give it to drug addicts, to drug dealers. It's almost like a two-tier conversation, this. And we want to know what we can do and what the solutions are being proposed. We had a credit union here. The credit union would only give credit to parents, and the security of that was they had to turn over their child benefit to pay the credit union. And the credit union was charging everyone 43%, and it was paying savers 1%. Now, that's a real issue because credit unions are supposed to be better. They're certainly not better than, except if you can't get a loan from or the use of a credit card or a loan from a bank, then 43% is definitely better than, say, 180% from Street UK or 533% from the Provident. But we need more solutions, and things like credit unions are very good, but 43% interest and only taking secured guaranteed benefits, they won't take any others. I think we've got bigger issues than us talking about when it comes to accessibility of cash. I think we've got bigger issues than telling us about our lives. So I'd like to see the conversation moved on from that.
Okay, thanks for that contribution, Caroline. And we'll come. I was going to take, because they're coming in a little bit thicker and faster in terms of questions. I'll take Idu as well. If you're able, if Izzy's able to unmute you. Idu,
thank you. Just managed to unmute myself. Can I just, RMP, Meg, you talked about post office a little earlier on. Cash inclusion, the community I represent, come from rather, which is in Greater Manchester. That part of the area where I'm from, it's an important issue for people to be able to access cash. And I'm sure this is, reflected throughout the country. And I know post office branches are actually working hard to encourage to dispense cash in several ways. Now, without being political or negative about anything, we used to have 15,000 branches up and down the country, post office. Now it's down to, I think it's just over or around 11,500 branches. Now, it is still a sizable network, if you compare it to the banks at the moment. Now, it's not it's not a whole answer, but post office can be utilized. Branches can be utilized to address the issue to a good extent. How well the branches are open 6 days a week, and where they are based in shops, supermarkets and what have you, or some standalone branches, they're open long hours, 6 days a week. And the busy branches do actually accommodate ATM, an ATM, and which is good really, because then, you know, people can access cash 24 hours a day, but obviously when post office branches are open, you can only access it during daytime or during opening hours. But I think that can be improved. I think over the past decade or so, subsequent government have, shall we say, without being negative about it, have neglected post office to such an extent. It proves the point. If you've been listening to things that coming out through media recently over the past year or so, you can just measure the depth of mismanagement and everything by subsequent government about the post office and the post office branches, how it's been run down, how it's been neglected, how it, every community, the surprising thing is every community wants a post office branch, and yet nobody wants to take the responsibility to manage it. So I think, my branches are accessible by people. That network can be used still to address the issue to a great extent. And I think we need to take that on board. Thanks for listening.
Appreciate that, and thanks for those two contributions. I'm just going to abuse the chair ever so slightly, if I may, Meg, just in terms of clearly this particular event and discussion. We've asked to look at access to cash in particular, but absolutely right to point to a range of factors within this particular debate. I think that some of, and just to sort of reflect ever so slightly on the point just raised in terms of post office, the co-op movement is one of the largest providers of post offices in the country now, and I know from them about the problem that they are facing in terms of keeping post offices alive within their own stores, as if you like, because of the amount of government policy which is pointed towards ultimately there being absolutely no ability for post offices to wash their face anymore in terms of access to cash. I have heard stories from cooperative societies where they're saying that every time cash is withdrawn from a post office, it ultimately costs. This is the place where government policy has put us towards. So on top of some of the pieces that you said there about that potential for the post office network, and the Labour Party looked at that through 17, 18 and 19 with the People's Bank being located within the post office network, which I thought was a strong suggestion. There is also this pervasive government policy which is seeking, in all honesty, to change our behaviour, our habits and our behaviours on top. So I just wanted a sort of a reflection from those cooperative societies involved in that. But Meg, so maybe over to yourself on some of the a couple of the other issues and that one as well, potentially.
Absolutely, and Caroline, it's a right challenge. I mean, yes, I was cantering through what part of the job of the committee is to highlight what's gone wrong. So we did make recommendations that we had said that the government, and they have to respond to these. So you can find all of that detail online, I should say. I can send a link to Joe and the Co-op Party afterwards. But we felt there was, as I said, there wasn't a lack of urgency to protect groups or to really even understand who uses cash and why it's so important that they continue to have access to it. And that can also be, I mean, there's all sorts of issues around, if you can't bank online, if you haven't got good Wi-Fi. So in rural areas, there are lots of layers to this, particularly, density and so on. But we wanted them to have a clear plan. We asked government to come up with a clear plan, including legislation for securing access to cash across the UK. We asked them to do that by March. That hasn't happened. So there's been real slow dragging of feet here. So what happens is we're having senior officials in government saying, oh yeah, we're committed to this. No action at all, which is why it needs to be a bit more noise about it, I think. And people, if MPs think this is, well, not just MPs, government thinks this is not really an issue, they won't act. If people clamour, hopefully they'll focus on it a bit more. So I think the policy is sort of there, but it's very dormant at the moment. And this lack of coordination, by turn, and it brings me neatly to the post office. Decisions can be made by individual bodies with very little protection left for the whole concept of access to cash, and I think that's what's really frustrating. Which brings me to the post office. And, you know, hands up, it was a Labour government that began to withdraw a lot of the contracts from post offices that would have helped prop them up. So there would have been, and the People's Bank idea was a really good way of bolstering that network. You know, again, the co-op being right there at the forefront of thoughtful and innovative ideas for policy, which wouldn't even need to be very costly. That's what's great usually about co-op policies. They don't have to cost the earth either. It's just about thinking about things from the community up, thinking about mutual support, really. But we found, so PayPoint has gone from a lot of posts. I think maybe that's gone back. I can't remember now if that's gone back now. But all the things that post offices used to be there for driving licenses, you can hand your passport form in now. That's still there. But there are lots of other things that post offices used to do that have been won over by chains of convenience stores instead of the post office. That makes them less sustainable, and often they were the last bit standing in the village shop or in a small town, a small area. And of course, they had a different approach to banking without fees and so on in the same way. So that is a good example of why you can buy. It wasn't even intended. The Labour government didn't intend to run down the post office network, but by chipping away at these marginal opportunities for the post office to provide a service and become a magnet for people to go, they reduced the footfall, and that had a really detrimental effect. So I think it's really good points you make there, Edu, about the post office, and the numbers are, you know, they speak for themselves. It's staggering. But it's interesting. You also highlighted this year about some post offices having ATMs. I'm not against ATMs. Obviously, they have a role, but an ATM really does exclude a lot of people, because that issue about what type of note they spit out. You know, when you haven't got much money left and you don't know what you've got, you've only got a tenner, you can only get £20 out. That's not good. And I think there is a real issue about how you expect people to survive if that's what's happening. And you know, that is something we need to consider in the mix as well. So when the government says go to a supermarket and take the money out, or we're going to preserve an ATM, that alone is not the answer, and we can't let them get away with it if that's what they're suggesting. But we don't know what they're suggesting yet, so we have to keep an eye on it. In terms of the cross-party committee, I should say, you know, that it's not actually particularly a party political divide on this. I think there is a divide by experience, perhaps, in Parliament, but there are certainly Conservatives who get this too. So, you know, where they will lobby their government, I'm happy to support them in that, because you know, that helps move things along. Then that's, in the end, we want the result.
Thanks very much for that, Meg. And I'm going to take two more contributions from participants. So if we're able to unmute Lorna Blackmore.
Okay, I've unmuted myself. In between 2.2 and 2.4, I worked on what brought you chip and pin. I worked in financial crime, and you didn't have chip and pin before 2004. But with chip and pin came merchant acquirers. So every time that you use your card on a machine, the people that you're buying from have to pay a fee. So Meg's young up and coming people in Shoreditch with their little things, every time they're taking a card rather than cash, it's costing them. So if they looked at their bottom line, if they took cash, they'd have more money for a start. The other thing is, with all this electronic stuff, if we're really into climate change, the amount of just outside Las Vegas, there's this huge place that's taking the cloud of all the transactions that everybody's doing, and it's the electricity for that's more than to light a city. So with cash, you can use it and use it and use it, so it's more user friendly. And then finally, the saying that people don't want to use cash. Well, on Millennium Night in Bluewater, they took out £1.5 million in cash from ATMs. So I'll just rest my case there.
Well, there you go. And thanks for that, Lorna, from a person who, as you say, had a role in chip and pin, an impassioned defence of cash. So thank you very much for that. Martin Bailey, over to yourself.
Thanks, Joe. And actually, just to kind of, I guess, counter Lorna's point slightly, I think we look at some of the reasons why small new businesses are card only. the kind of reduced counterfeit of quite the business expenses make it easier for them to be card only in terms of the end of the day Z counts until cashing it. But also there is the knock-on effect of having less bank branches. There are less places for them to go and then take the cash at the end of the day, and it creates more reasons for them not to take cash. And so I think we need to be sure we're considering that in the whole when we ask businesses to take cash, actually looking, if we know there's no bank branches left in our constituencies, where are they going to take those cash at the end of the day? It would be good to understand from the campaign, are we looking at kind of free access to cash as well, as opposed to just, I know you gave stats on the number paid for cash points. If I think of my own ward in South London, there is only one free cash point, which is a Tesco. There is no other free cash point in my ward, and so we have to think about access to cash is fine, but encouraging more pay for cash at ATMs isn't going to help the local community in that sense. And a slight devil's advocate here is, are we also linking this with kind of inclusion generally and actually getting the unbanked banked and things as well? Because I feel a worry that such a campaign of access to cash actually only serves us to feel a bit kind of living in the 90s still a little bit, and actually not necessarily going forward with the times of where everyone else is going, actually bringing people into the digital world as opposed to just trying to create reasons to keep them in their own bubble.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Martin. I have asked for a second campaign link to be put into the chat there, which is Unlocking the High Street, and that takes us in towards some of the pieces in and around sort of a sustainable community and use of high street, use of community facilities. It takes us slightly beyond our access to cash discussion today, but some really practical measures in terms of lobbying and working with councillors in local government on some of those wider issues which have been touched on. I did one, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to do this every time, but there's one particular piece of legislation from the US which I have always wanted to be able to land as Labour Party policy, if I was absolutely honest, and we got close once some years ago, which is the Community Reinvestment Act. A remarkable bit of legislation in America. It came straight out of Dodd-Frank and you know, from the Depression onwards, that piece of legislation in America. Community Reinvestment Act essentially says that the large financial service providers are not serving financial products in a range of communities, postcodes and areas and types of community. They're just not. And it recognizes that through the collection of data. And the data, what the Central Reserve is able to do is to watch the lending patterns and watch the banking patterns from each of the main financial institutions and lay it against geography. And what you see there is a horrid picture of where those institutions think there is a profitable financial transaction to take place. And what it forces that large bank to do is to literally reinvest cash into other types of financial services which will serve those areas. Which is why you have a lot of smaller banks in America operating on very much more local levels compared to what we've got is 4 main banks, HSBC, etc., etc. In America, you have that larger sort of environment of banking institutions, and it's all driven by the Community Reinvestment Act. And in the UK, our Bank of England does collect that data. It does collect that data, and in recent history within the Co-op Party, what we've tried to force the Bank of England to do is publish that data in a usable form. Because what the Bank of England says right now is that yes, we collect it, but no, we don't put it out in a usable form because we're not expected to. So we need to change government's mind to say that I know that the Bank of England collect that, and I know that they're looking at it, but what we now need is an obligation for them to publish that data and the critical bit is in a usable form. Because if it wasn't in a usable form, they'd throw that data up and it would mean nothing to anyone because it would be huge and it would be unmanageable, it would be ridiculous. So if we can start to build the building blocks of the Community Reinvestment Act, the first port of call is to force the Bank of England in order to publish that data, and we can start to see exactly what you've just said, Martin, which is in your ward, you have one cash machine which is free to use. In my area, I might have I got one? No, the Co-op actually is not an advert, but just in the Co-op would be mine in my local area. And if you can start to see what the banks are actually doing in terms of those sort of transactions and where their cash is being withdrawn from, because it's not in areas like mine and potentially not in Stockwell and areas like yours, Martin. And we can do that through data. We can do that through publishing. Sorry, it's a want that I've wanted to get over for some years. But sorry, Meg, sorry.
No, absolutely.
A hobby horse.
I nearly mentioned it in my, but I didn't want to stray too far from the cash issue.
Sorry.
But it's been a bugbear of mine. If you look at what the banks do, they're lending money in mortgages, but they're not they're getting interest on people's mortgages and loans and so on, but they're not reinvesting in their own area. And we've still got the Nationwide as a mutual. Co-op bank's not really a mutual anymore, is it? But at least the Co-op group has some ethics about reinvesting back in its community, but it's got to be that meaningful investment, because if we don't have basic bank accounts and people having access to financial services at that basic level, then you're excluding them from quite an early stage, and making it harder for all sorts of other issues and transactions, including when it comes to having credit records and taking loans and so on. And then they're forced into the hands of people who are wanting to charge them far too much that's realistic to take out a loan. And I think that there is an endemic divide between people who are automatically in the banking system because they've earned a certain amount of money, they've got that into that habit, and the people who are just frightened of money going somewhere and then not being able to have a track of it. And so we've got to do more to challenge. I mean, I do think that the high street banks have got away with being murdered. What the whole advent of payday loans was partly because too many banks just didn't provide the right sort of loans to people who, people will need loans that's just the reality of life. But if it's not done through the main high street banks because they've decided that it's too difficult for them or too risky, then where do people go? And we've got to take a wider view as a society, and that's where government has got a role. And I think Martin, you're right about the free access to cash. This is one of the key things. It's not the payment drives me mad, because of course it's a flat rate. So that means if you're taking out, as I said, a small amount, you're paying disproportionate percentage of what you're taking out compared with someone who's taking out a lot of money. Most people, I suppose you might take out a lot of money if you're going for a night out and think it's worth the cost. If you that's the nearest cash point. But if you're only taking out 10 or 20 pounds, it's a very high percentage charge that you're paying. But fascinated, Lorna, about chip and pin. Of course, yes. But I think actually in a way Martin answered the question. The hassle factor of trying to find a bank that's open to deposit the cash at the end of the day, businesses will take the fee. They just take it as part of their overheads now, and that is an issue. We've got to remember as well that a lot of businesses need those banks too. We talk about individuals here, but look, the Co-op Party it's thinking over the years has been at the forefront of a lot of this. It's very frustrating not being in government. One of the things, if I can segue for a moment, Joe, is one of the things I've always wanted to see is when Labour gets back into government, see a Co-op unit in the heart of the business department, and possibly actually in the Treasury would be great, to understand what co-ops and mutuals could deliver and make sure that it's advising all departments on this. And just to finish on that, when I was a minister a long time ago now, I wanted to try and mutualise the forensic science service. So I asked officials at the department to get to help to support my ideas on this. I got a lot of ministers together. We had some ideas, but they went to the Department of Business that came up with what it thought was they wanted to describe what a co-op was, what a mutual was, and they just listed what John Lewis does. Employee share ownership was what they described it as. They absolutely had, it was on a completely different page. I was cried because I didn't know where to start if that was what we were getting from the heart of Whitehall. So we need to, as a co-op party, be really hammering this to all our front bench teams and making sure that we have people from day one at the cabinet table whenever we're back in power that is pushing these ideas, because without that understanding, a lot of these issues more widely, some of the ones that Joe's been talking about, will just not bite. We might win on something small, important like cash potentially, but we're not going to get that understanding driven through. And if we're going to build back better, it means building with everybody. And what better model than a mutual for delivering a lot of the services that we've relied on so massively over the last year and a half.
Thank you very much, Megan. I would also point colleagues on the call to a great organisation which does not always gets the attention it should, but Responsible Finance I think that they've got some really interesting ideas and views in this space as well. So if you do have a moment and you want to have a look at someone else who's in this area, responsible finance would be a good one. We've got two last questions, Megan. If we will, we'll just take our two last questions before we wrap up. Georgina and Mary, really briefly, we've gone slightly over our time, so I'm pushing my luck with Meg this evening. So if we're able just to take these two questions very quickly tonight, that would be fantastic. Georgina, over to you.
Thank you. Just very quickly, I always try and use the post office to keep them going, but I understand that the government are now withdrawing the payment of state pensions into the post office, so that's yet another thing they're losing. And I always get cash from inside the post office at the counter because they said that helps them keep in business. But also it is so frustrating that that when you go to places, you are forced into not using cash. I've been to my local huge park today and I'd got cash ready to put in the parking meter, but when I get there, I've got to download an app. Well, it's people who don't have smartphones, they can't use it. You ring the number. I was told my account's been disabled because it didn't work last time. I've never had an account. And then I find I can actually pay to a cafe in the other side of the park. So everything is working against you being able to use cash. And I get so frustrated by it because I think of all the people who don't have smartphones, who don't know how to download an app. And besides which, a lot of people can budget so much better knowing the cash they've got. Yeah. That's my little rant. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I've had three little rants, Georgina, so I'm two up on you. But thank you very much for that. And it actually does go back to a point which was made in the chat earlier on in terms of that link between access to cash and digital exclusion as well, which no doubt we'll touch on in future events. But Mary, the last question from yourself as well. If my colleague is able to bring in Mary. Is he? Are you able to? Or just waiting for that to be unmuted, Mary. Maybe you can do it yourself. There you go.
Thank you. Yes, and this isn't what the topic of the discussion was, but since you mentioned the post office, they've been dealt an absolute body blow by this thing about the Horizon system not working, and hundreds. I don't have the statistics because I haven't rehearsed this. Hundreds of post office workers accused of stealing money. They were paying it back. They were borrowing and going into mortgaging their homes to pay it back, and some of them have been to prison. A few of them have had their cases overturned, but there's a lot of unfinished business there. The chief executive of the post office was a lady reverend of the Church of England, and she just quietly resigned recently. And it was on Radio 4, but it's gone all quiet, but it's still unfinished. Now, the thing about the Horizon not working, if money disappeared out of the system, and I got a bit of experience of managing databases with, it's only pretend money with the Let scheme, but it's figures on a database, it doesn't disappear. It goes somewhere. You know, it can't disappear. So it's not a question of the Horizon system not working. Who had access to that system to falsify these transactions or make money disappear? Where did the money go? Now, nobody's even asked these questions, and it would be nice if you could just sort of take this up, because this thing's gone all quiet. And it's an absolute filthy scandal, which has absolutely knocked so many hundreds of people out of their work running the post office and ruined their lives.
Mary. Thank you.
So that's my little rant. Any
No, thank you for that. I think both contributions adequately underscoring the importance of institutions like the post office and others within access to cash, and those points were made well. And Meg, I don't know whether your committee will have a chance to inquire in that area of Horizon. Is that one?
No, it's not something that falls to us. Other committees like the business committee are looking into this, or have looked into it. But I think the court ruling has really trumped everything. And all, you know, criticise her for not resigning earlier, but she did resign, the chief executive. But it was a classic example of something we see on the committee, that everyone up the line just trusts that it's fine because it's a big system, it's brilliant. You know, they've drunk the Kool-Aid really and believe it works, and they're not challenging enough. And that happens too often in government, that there's a group think that doesn't say, actually, hang on a minute, this isn't working. These are good, solid postmasters and postmistresses who've worked hard for years. How come so many of them are suddenly, you know, got their hands in the till? It doesn't quite compute. So sometimes some of the simplest questions we ask on my committee are those common sense questions, and they can floor witnesses more than some of the technical ones because they just haven't thought it through like that. So I think it's right that we challenge that, and that's partly, you know, what we as politicians need to do, is to bring those basic, if you like, common sense questions. And one of the reasons that, you know, we all do meet people at surgeries and on doorsteps a lot in order to make sure that we're really tuning in to those issues. But I just wanted to finish really with Georgina's point, because Georgina, you really highlighted the digital divide. You know, this conversation is interesting. We start with cash, but actually it links to poverty, to the digital divide, to the, you know, to the future of the post office network. There's loads of elements to this, and the co-op party's been active on a number of these. But the digital divide is something that's going to get worse. We've seen it in lockdown. We saw the challenge for school children who didn't have access. Had, you know, heartbreaking stories from constituents, you know, whose children couldn't access Wi-Fi at home, and the impact that that's had on them. So I think that in terms of the money stuff that we're talking about, kind of going back to some of the things I was saying at the beginning, you know, you can't do stuff online if you don't have a smartphone, you don't have access to Wi-Fi, and even the vaccine rollout is affected by that digital divide, where people are getting messages from their GP to their phone. But if you only have a simple phone just because so you can pick it up when your children ring, you know, if you've got that, you might not pick it up. Maybe English isn't your first language. I mean, you know, all sorts of reasons why a text message to your phone isn't going to cut it. And I think we've got to keep hammering home that digital divide is not going to go away just through age. It's not an age thing. It's actually to do with money as well. So, you know, when we leveling up the co-op way is actually leveling up anywhere across the country where there's poverty side by side with wealth, and instead of this ridiculous north-south divide and putting statues in town centres because somehow that makes a town centre, well, level up. It just, no one knows what levelling up means, I should say. I'm very cynical about it. You know, even if you stopped 10 Tory MPs, they wouldn't really be able to tell you what levelling up means. They'd all say something different. So we've got to try and grab that agenda. So let's take that phrase back, Joe, and launch the co-op levelling up agenda.
Let's get rid of that cynicism as well. This is a cooperative party event. We leave our cynicism at the door. No, I'd like to think that we all do that every day. But no, thank you very much for those questions and that discussion. Look, it's financial inclusion and and exclusion in its various guises is something which does go to the core of what our co-op movement is about. It does feature throughout our policy making. We will always be pushing on a range of issues, whether it be access to cash, whether it be extending common bond, whether it be some of the issues that I've talked about in terms of community reinvestment, in terms of access to fair lending as well, away from the payday lenders and other things like that. So there is a basket of issues within our financial inclusion work, but this is one of particular interest as we come out of lockdown. We start to reassess the way in which we interact with the community around us. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Sarah, I'm really sorry we haven't had time to catch you, but if you are able to email through on events.party.coop, Sarah, I and myself and Meg will I'll get back to you as well. So,
and I'll send the links, Joe, to the various bits of documents I referred to.
Please do, and we'll circulate those as well. Other than that, thank you very much, friends, for joining us here on this session today. I've learned a lot, and I've taken a lot from yourselves as well. And then we'll be back next week with more Cooperation Live. So thank you from me, and see you soon. Bye bye now.